Hey Lana, you know that thing how you always dig into trash? The little former princess asked as the twins walked back to their family. Oh boy, the tomboy groaned instinctively. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean that. Lana chuckled nervously as she rubbed her own arm. Force of habit. It's fine, but I just want you to know this. Sure, it's a really gross habit, but the real reason I don't want you eating out of the trash isn't just for appearances. Do you even know where some of that stuff has been? Well, Lana scratched her chin. Not really. Besides some of the chewed gum I have stashed, I stole those from under the desks or tables. That's what I'm saying. You could get really sick from doing that. Maybe not today, but it's bad for your health. I mean, do you know how many icky germs are in that dumpster alone? Not to mention the disease filthing carrying rats, bugs, and. Lola stopped. Then Lana put her hand to her mouth. Okay, I get it. It's bad for me. But how do you know all this? When you sat next to Lisa in the car, she won't stop talking. It's literally the only thing keeping me sane. The girly twin cringed a bit. I think she might be the reason why I'm so afraid of germs. The tomboy shrugged. Coming from a brainiac who keeps talking about how we die in a car accident, that's no shocker. She put her arm around her twin. But if it will cheer you up, I'll start eating out of the trash less. Lola looked at Lana with a wary look. What? You can't expect me to stop me completely, Lana chuckled. Guess some things won't change. Lola laughed, said as well. You both seem pretty happy. A new voice cut in. The twins yelped in fear before looking towards their front. Unsurprisingly, it was their older sister, Lucy. She stared at two uninterested gaze. You really need to stop doing that, Lucy, Lola stammered. Well, if you guys would be more attentive for once, Demo said awkwardly. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I was only on my way to Miss Lopez's office, since I'm the last one she needs to speak with. Well, the door is open for you, Lana stated before she and Lola walked back to the lobby. Lucy watched them as they left, before heading towards the therapist's office. She stopped outside the door at the tinge of nervousness tinging down her spine. Sigh. Let's just get this over with. Miranda had just finished rearranging the pillows that was on the couch when she heard the door open. Looking at Lucy, she was rather surprised by the girl's attire. It seems Lola's assumption at Lucy being an emo wasn't a joke. Black dress, pale skin, black hair to match. Although Miranda had a sneaking suspicion that black wasn't Lucy's nature hair, given how the color of the rest of their sisters looked. You must be Lucy. I was just about to call in for you, the psychologist smiled. I know, so I figured I'd spare you the time and energy and just walk in. Miranda also took note of the girl's lack of emotion in her voice. So, she sat in a chair. How are things going for you today? She gestured the girl to take a seat. Sigh, still sitting in everlasting despair and anguish. I'm usually used to that kind of thing, but not so much as a week ago, Lucy stated, before sitting down on the lounge. Lucy is definitely much like her other emo clients I've ever had. Miranda then stated in her head as she quickly wrote something down. Now, Lucy, given what I've talked with the rest of your family, I'm sure you probably know these sorts of discussions work. Lucy nodded. You have a rule where whatever we discussed can be kept between us, but I'm free to make or use our sessions however I want. Miranda gave a sigh of relief. Okay, good. But to be honest, it was getting rather repetitive. Usually, I have to talk to this many clients in a single day. I can understand that. I'm not much of a talker myself, the 8-year-old replied, shifted slightly in her seat. But before we start, I want to know something. See? Is Lincoln going to be okay? Lucy asked, faint traces of hope appearing in her face. Miranda gave an uncertain look, which what Lucy needed to know. He's still a long ways off then. Possibly, but I can at least give him some advice that should hopefully get him to reason and question his fears, rather than just letting them run rampant. Lucy didn't say anything after that, just staring at the doctor. Right, so Lucy, how has the past week been for you? Dreadful. Well, more than usual. I used to like the thought of isolation, but now I feel completely alone. Own. Do you want to elaborate on that? The dark haired child nodded. Ever since people started to question what happened to Lincoln, only a few of my friends know the truth. But at this point, I could definitely say that I have no longer have friends. They couldn't bear to have the thought of hanging out with someone who would take part in savagely beating their own sibling. Not that I blame them. I'm still disgusted with myself to the point that I wish I was invisible, never to be seen again. When you said more than usual, is this your usual attitude on a daily basis? The girl gave a small nod. I usually confine myself in darkness whenever I can. In my house, I tend to be away from most of my family by hiding in the vents, attic, even in the chimney. Just any dark place I could find. Is it due to medical conditions? Lucy shook her head. No, I just like dark places. It tends to help me concentrate on what kind of poems I want to write. Unfortunately, I usually end up stuck trying to figure out what rhymes with a certain word. I would sometimes ask my sisters for help, but they weren't interested or can't think of anything. So that leaves me to ask the depressed child paused, my brother for help. Miranda took a couple notes. Does Lincoln usually help you when it comes to your literature work? Most of the time, even when he's not in the mood to do much, Lincoln still offers a hand anyways. But that's just how Lincoln is. He's supportive of both myself and the rest of my sisters. It's shameful of how we ended up introducing a system that essentially refused his aid. Miranda rested her chin on her hands. Interesting. Speaking of your sisters, what kind of relationship would you say you have with them? I've heard from a few of them that you've been depressed for as long as I could remember. However, given my past experience with other clients suffering from depression, they weren't always like this. As such, I treat it as a harshly until the person they described opened up about it. I want to know how you became, well, you. Lucy gave a quizzical look before giving a real sigh. You were right on one thing. I wasn't always like this. She looked back at the ceiling. Back when I was much younger, I say Lily's age, I was your typical innocent child who was curious about the world around her. The 8-year-old looks at her reflection in a nearby mirror and then looks at her hand. Most I think it is how I always looked as if I was a little girl. But the only truth is on that part is my skin. So you were saying you were born with pallor? Lucy was about to reply but closed her mouth. Her eyes shifted as if she was trying to figure out what it meant. I know I heard Lisa use that word before. The therapist giggled a little. It means you have an unusual lightness of your skin color that appears on most people, and in other words, you were just born with pale skin, dear. It's just usually a common condition that's hereditary. Well, like I said, only my skin is usually pale since birth. Lisa thought it might have been due to me being born prematurely, but Mom said I was born only 2 weeks before I was expected. That sounds a bit premature, I guess, but she said it was normal for babies to come around that frame. However, Lucy shyly played with a few strands of her hair. My hair is actually the same shade blonde as Laurie's. So when did you start using hair dye? Sometime after I started getting interested in supernatural stuff. Lucy looked back at the psychologist. It first started when I was watching a ghost hunting show called Academy for Really Good Ghost Hunters when I was 3 years old. Lincoln always liked that stuff and he watches it today. But, unlike him, I decided to look more and more into the whole supernatural aspect of ghosts. I wanted to see if these unfortunate souls have unfinished business of how I could try to help them. Dad always says I look like his grandmother, which would explain a lot of things. How so? I once found a picture of my great-grandmother Harriet. I was surprised at what my dad said was true, minus the black hair since at the time I didn't had used hair dye yet. Lucy lied back on the couch. Along with the photo, I also had a few books about occasionalism, rituals, how to speak to spirits, as well as a book about mystical creatures. After checking out the last book, I learned a lot more about ghosts, but it didn't stop there. I had also come to learn about mummies, werewolves, zombies, witches, and even vampires. A small blush formed on Lucy's face. The last one got my attention the most. I learned how these creatures had the night to live off sucking blood from their victims, sometimes turning them into vampires like themselves, or even slaves. My interest for vampires grew to the point where I wanted to become one myself. Miranda shifted her legs a bit. And did that work? Well, at first I had to become one with the darkness, and the first thing I did was start wearing dark colored clothing. It had me great in blending in with the dark areas of the house, but my hair stood out like a sore thumb. Lucy folded her arms across her chest. Yellow and black definitely didn't mix, unless you're a bee. The emo gave a small sigh, her traditional frown forming. Luann would occasionally call me Miss Beatrice. Because of that, I had to make it up to the next level, dyeing my hair. I thought about just making a darker shade of blonde or brown, like some of my sisters. But at the end, I settled for black. I felt that it would be best not only to help me blend more, but also as a tribute to my great grandmother, who helped me recover my passion. I never knew it until then, but having my hair like this, it just felt right. I never really appealed to having blonde hair, but I felt as if I didn't have to worry about that anymore. My parents thought it was cute, and I was trying to be like great grandma Harriet. Through my dad was a little spooked by it, but then again, he never liked spooky things anyway. A small smile adorned her face, swinging her legs hung aimlessly over the side. He would get jumpy at the smallest things when Halloween came. I see. Did you stop there when you finally got the look? No, I wanted to go further by mimicking the acts of vampires. Lucy gave a small chuckle. I still remember when I used to say things like, I want to suck your blood. We all had a good few memories of that. However, when I started watching TV shows about vampires, I found out that they have little emotion to them. That's why I started practicing showing off little emotion as possible with my voice and face. It was rather difficult because I had to keep finding a reason to smile. I couldn't make any sound like lacked of any feeling, so I decided to try hiding my eyes behind my hair. This method worked, as so no one could tell what I was thinking with a blank face. Lucy gave a slow snort, but it did make the bump into the walls quite often, since I didn't see that wall. Miranda had a hand over her mouth to keep herself from laughing. And when I was watching one show in particular, Lucy's blush returned. I felt for a certain vampire in particular series. I started watching Vampires and Melancholia when I was 6, and it was hooked on since the first episode. Over time, the vampires of named Edwin, he became everything I wanted to be. His looks, his hair, his uncaring gleam in his eyes, his fangs. I wanted to be his soulmate. A heavenly tone was laced over her voice. Miranda gave a small, nervous glance at Lucy as she wrote this down. Okay, a bro-chain fangirl territory, she sighed awkwardly. I had to beg my parents to let me buy a bust of him. It was worth every penny of all the extra chores I had to do. Lucy turned a bit so her legs were now resting on the chair instead of dangling uselessly. But over time I realized I would never become a true vampire. They say you have to be bitten on the neck to be a vampire by a bat to become one. And as far as I know, nothing like that lives in a state where you see snow every winter. However, I would end up having a bat of my own for a pet after all. Did you go out and find one or did it come to you? Lucy gave a small hand wave. Technically, it was both. During one night when I came out of the bathroom, I heard what sounded like fluttering in the attic. I thought that it might have been a bird since they sometimes get stuck in there. I wanted to see if I could help it out. It turns out it was a fruit bat that got trapped in some wiring in the ceiling. I grabbed the ladder and freed it, and hoping it would fly away, but instead it stuck to me like glue. I think this was due to bat freeing quite young. The emo scratched her head. Fangs is a juvenile bat now, so he is probably close to reaching his teen years when I found him. A small smile then formed on her face. I tried to get him to leave ever since I knew my parents wouldn't let me keep a bat of all things, but they were pretty hesitant about letting Lana keep her pet lizard Izzy. More so than her snake. Plus I knew Dad would freak out. But Fangs didn't want to leave, so I just decided to let him stay. Surprisingly and unsurprisingly, my parents had freaked out upon seeing him. Well, I expected Dad to, but I didn't think Mom would as well. However, they had decided to let me keep him on the basis that I care for him. Seems like a typical parental response to a child bringing home a stray animal. The supernatural lover nodded in agreement. Soon after I got fangs, Lynn started calling me the Queen of Darkness. My heart swelled with pride upon hearing that name called for the first time, and soon enough, I started getting more into other stuff about the supernatural, particularly in talking with spirits or practicing spells. Lucy sat up. Don't tell anyone this, but one time when I was 7, I've been practicing a ritual for speaking with those beyond grave, and I got a message back. Miranda was a bit skeptical about that. Really? From who? My great grandmother. I was so scared that I swore to my skin, almost like it was bleached. I had to try to summon a great ghost before, but I had never gotten an answer. Lucy shivered a little. I immediately ended the ritual, but I could still hear the voice in my head. Has this kept you awake for any length of time? Lucy gave a small nod. It had been for a few weeks. Soon enough, I decided to try again, just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. I performed the ritual and I heard that voice again. I just couldn't believe it. I actually managed to get in contact with a deceased relative. The Duchess of Darkness cheered for a brief moment. Before her frown took form again, I told the rest of my family about it, but they didn't seem to believe me. You probably don't either, but I'm not going to hold that against you. Miranda nodded. It's okay, Lucy. Now, given with your involvement with the supernatural, do you feel that this is sometime alienated from your family? Lucy hesitated to answer. She, of course, she would like to believe that since the emo had still remained close to her immediate relatives, but when it came down to it, this was one of the main reasons she stopped caring about a lot of things. It was small at first, but as the year passed, Lucy had admitted to had gotten worse. Yes, her voice became tad watery. It wasn't really the fact that none of my siblings weren't interested in the stuff I like. I'll admit that it bothered me at one point, but only because it was one of those moments where Lincoln had an idea and the rest of us decided to copy it. He wanted to mold Lily into liking stuff he did. You can always guess what happened there. The little vampire fan lied back on the lounger. What was really starting to bother me was how much my siblings started to not notice me around the house. For a long time, I started practicing popping out of nowhere like a ghost. It was just trying to scare my family for fun. It was enjoyable for a while, but in a house as loud as mine, I guess practicing quiet will have its downsides. You started to get noticed less and less, even when you weren't trying? The Latina questioned. The 8-year-old gave us another nod. I didn't really mind it at first. I thought that they were pretty much getting used to my ghost walk, as they call it. However, when I started to begin to realize they didn't notice me coming, even if I was walking right past them. For example, I would walk into one of their rooms when it was all quiet, and I would have thought they would hear my footsteps. But at the moment I speak, they jump in fright. Started during the later half of my 7th year, continued into my 8th. It had been going far for so long. I stopped even caring that much about my siblings' opinions. I guess you could say that I started entering a goth phase. Lucy then gave a heavy sigh. But I did my best I could not to let my siblings' lack of attention to get to me. If they want to remain obvious to the fact that I'm just trying purposely to scare them, fine. What really broke my heart into little pieces was when the family was going on a road trip planned vacation. Lucy's face grew grim. Miranda had this feeling that the little girl's tale would be encompassed. What happened? This little getaway was different from the first time we tried taking a road trip. Last time all of us ended up fighting over a car seat and the van got destroyed. One time though, we all promised to be our best behavior. Our parents were very worried but trusted us regardless. However, I had taken a nightly stroll with Fanes that stayed out a little later than I wanted to. As such, I tried, but I couldn't hear out the alarms going off the next morning. Lucy formed a scowl on her face. However, that was when I believed that Lynn had forgotten to wake me up. We've slept in the same room ever since the twins were born. She just likes leaves, and I wasn't even there. A few tears started to stream down her face. What was even hand to her face? And what was worse is that Mom and Dad didn't realize I wasn't in the car until they were like 30 miles from home. I could handle my siblings not noticing me, but my parents? Lucy had her hand to her face, still trying to shield her face from relieving feeling pain. Miranda sat silently as Lucy continued to cry to herself, the child's sobs echoing throughout the room. Just as figured, Lucy's depression stemmed from abandonment issues, not the usual case for depressed children. Older clients tend to suffer from drug-related problems or loss of a loved one. In Lucy's case, she effectively became broken by everything she was interested in. She had gotten what she wished for, to become more focused and around tuned to the supernatural, but it strained her relationship with her family as it seemed. At that point, when I became almost completely emotionless, I became more and more moody and depressed despite countless apologies my parents and siblings have gave me, and my voice showed it. It lacked of any care or happiness, leaving nothing but despair. All the apologies remained of how little they've taught me. Lucy sniffled. I feel like I was drowning in pain and sorrow. I had nothing to let it out. I thought that I could have snapped at some point. My teachers noticed and called my parents, but that little to no help. They they just thought I was going through a phase and I would get over it at some point. They didn't realize how much pain I really felt. Really, it didn't help because I became so cold to them. The girl grabbed some tissues from a nearby box to blow her nose. I'm very, very sorry to hear that, Lucy. I know with some parents it can be hard to pick up on certain cues, but Miranda started. Well, at least they did. I still kept up with the many things I normally do, but I usually keep it to myself more and more. Lucy tossed the tissue away, pulling her legs to her chest. At most of the times at this day, I would hide away the vents of the house or the attic, just looking through books. It was one of the few ways that could bring a smile to my face at time. Then during one of the school days, we had a project they required us to write a poem about ourselves. I didn't realize it before, but the words literally flowed out into the paper I wrote. I poured every feeling of sadness and anguish into my work, and when I turned it in to the teacher, she was surprised of how well written and emotional that was. Not only I did get the best grade in the class, but it was also put on the wall in the school work for decorated achievements. At first I didn't think much of it. I just did what I was told. But if my teacher felt that she had a knack for writing, I decided to give it a try. Lucy could hear the therapist silently scribbling notes. So you write poems on a daily basis these days? She asked. Yes. It's helped me cope with my inner turmoil since not the day went I by, but I wasn't seen without my journal. Well, until recently, that is. The emo gave another sniffle. So, do you and your siblings often get into fights? The Hispanic woman asked. Lucy didn't answer for a few moments. At most, the kids got into arguments. She could agree with that. Coming from blows, though, it was a different matter. Usually it's the twins doing it. Sometimes it's with herself and Lynn. Lori and Lenny were no better either. It was the same story with Luna and Luann. Probably the ones who didn't fight very little were Lisa and Lily. With Lincoln, it was a matter of perspective. Just arguments for the most part. Actually hitting each other. Not too often, I guess. However, I will say at one point or another, I have had issues with all my siblings at the same time. What occurred during this incident? My siblings' lack of attention finally got to my nerves to the point where they literally acted like my opinion didn't matter, along with the fact they still didn't notice me when I wasn't trying to hide from them. They also didn't remind me that we had two sibling meetings. Worst of all, my poem journal was destroyed thanks to Lisa. Lucy folded her arms in disgust. I was so fed up with all that I just want to go back to them, but didn't know how. When I went into the attic, I stumbled upon a chest full of great grandma Harriet's stuff and found a spell book. I figured it was the best way to get revenge, but it seemed that the spells weren't working at first. So I decided to make my siblings mute so they would finally listen to me. The 8-year-old's eyes were filled with guilt. It worked at first, but when I started to see how my siblings were suffering because of it. However, it turned out they lost their voices from cheering our Pop-Pop on his shuffleboard game. They had apologized to me for their treatment, and I had apologized for making them do so. Everything I say, it made me feel warm inside in me for the first time, what felt like an eternity. Miranda noted this. So it seems that your siblings have finally reached an understanding? We did. After all that, I realized that maybe it was time for me to start making more positive. I wasn't in any mood for my usual self, so I should try and reach out and read other lighter toned. I read a series called Princess Pony. For the first time I looked in the library, I skimmed through a few books, took a liking to it, but I didn't want my siblings to know I was into the stuff like that. The psychologist grew confused. But why? If you and your brothers and sisters had anything better relationship, I would think they would start react negatively towards your choice. Lucy sunk her head a little. While I need a break from the darkness, I knew my siblings would react mockingly towards the effect I had Princess Pony. Even Lola wasn't liking it that much. At one point, my secret was almost revealed when I accidentally left the book in the toilet at night. Miranda cringed at that. Yeah, I know. It wasn't the most sanitary place I could store it, but I had little choice since I heard someone was coming. It led to rather interesting days, so to speak. Of course, the toilet was clogged. Everyone besides me blamed Lincoln for it, and has had a bad habit of stuffing things down the pipe. However, eventually, he found out it really was me who did it, despite the findings, ways to put the blame on the others. I was already ready to admit the girls the truth. Lucy's heart sank at what she was going to say next. But at the end, Lincoln did took the blame for himself. After seeing how much the others were mocking the series, he could take it, and I couldn't. Sigh. I just wish I could have figured out a better way to make it up to him, especially now. Miranda tapped her fingers together. Lucy, how close are you to your brother? Hmm? Would you agree that you and Lincoln have shared a close bond with you over these years? And if so, what do you think the reason is behind it? Lucy stared at the ceiling. You could say I've grown attached to Lincoln ever since I was a baby. He just seems so different than like I was. Unlike my other siblings, Lincoln actually has white hair that his mom actually says he gets it from our grandfather. We both shared the same room until our family got larger, and I had to share with Lynn. We were essentially playmates as much as he and Lynn were. I actually tried to get him into the kind of supernatural stuff I was into, but sadly, it just wasn't his thing. If I had to say which siblings I've had the best relationship with, it'd be Lincoln and Lynn. I don't just interact with my other sisters well enough to get to know them on a more personal level. DMO drummed her fingers on the couch. My energetic roommate probably was already told you about this kind of relationship we have, and she's right on that end. With Lincoln, though, I could never ask for a more supportive brother like him. Why it pains me greatly knowing the state he's in. Lucy felt more tears coming, so she grabbed her tissues. I can't help but wonder, what kind does he think of me now? I know he's probably got this constant night terrors about myself and my sisters. No doubt his mind is fabricating us as complete monsters. Dad said he had another one before you talked to him. The girl shook her head. It's just... She paused. I really wish I could have had my journal right now. Lucy started to go into another crying fit. Miranda took a few moments to look back over her notes. Just as she figured, Lucy's issues seemed to be similar to Lisa's. Both girls felt alienated from their family due to pursuing their interests, but in Lucy's case, she didn't act like she had been ignored when she was going on with her usual business, while the latter it seems to be stemmed by her siblings with reaching a better understanding. It did give Miranda a clear confirmation that Lynn Sr. and Rita have failed to notice their kids having internal problems. Well, to be fair, she did have this feeling was the case after listening to a few of the girls, but with Lucy outright stating that her parents just to think that she's going through a phase, Well, there was enough proof of that. As a psychologist and the concern of 10 kids, their parents needed to hear about this. As far as Lucy was concerned, Miranda now had the whole story of how the young girl went from being happy-go-lucky to being a shell of what she used to be. However, it seemed that Lucy was forming into her own person. She had embraced the dark nature for a long time ago and had learned to live with the current relationship of her family. Still, it must have been hard for her to recall the memories she had made along the way, that is. At this point, Lucy was unsurprisingly just like the rest of her siblings, wanting to find a way to return their brother to his former self. Well, Lucy, I can assure you that I will do whatever I can to help your brother. Like I have told the rest of your sisters, there is a chance Lincoln will get over his fears. I don't believe he's too far down the road where he wouldn't listen to reason. However, it has been come to my attention that there has been a lack of communication for everyone in the family. In your situation, you finally got tired of your siblings not noticing you enough that you finally did something about it? Now, of course, I think that might have been preferable had you had all talk with your problems out instead of acting your emotions, but it seems that it might have worked out just fine. In the future, I've highly encouraged that instead of bottling up your feelings, just talk to someone about them. I'm here for all of you, actually. Lucy nodded, cleansing her eyes. Thank you, Miss Lopez. Now, is there anything else you wish to discuss? Anything else you have trouble with? The emo shook her head, getting out. No, but I thank you for the talk. I haven't told anyone else who I really became. Me, but thank you for bringing it to light. That's why I'm here, sweetie. And oh, before you go, are your parents still out there? Mom is. Dad is at the hospital with Lincoln. Okay, when you leave, I need to speak to Rita real quick. Lucy nodded before leaving. Not soon after, large footsteps indicated that the loud march was approaching. Rita let herself in and closed the door. Unlike last time, she was still a little confused as to why Miranda wished to speak with her again. Yes, Miss Lopez? She asked, about to sit down. You don't need to sit down for this, Miss Rita. This won't take a moment. Miranda said quickly before flipping her notes. So after speaking with everyone in the family, it's come to my attention that each of your daughters is dealing with problems that they weren't either aware or refused to talk about it. After speaking with Lucy, it's come to my attention that some issues that the girls have been dealing with may be misattributed, but as something else. Now I recommend that everyone sits down together to discuss their issues. I believe it would help give the families some closure as well as making each of them all aware of the current standing. I believe it will be uncomfortable at first, but at the end it will bring you all closer together. I think it may also help if it's done in the environment everyone is comfortable in. Rita was surprised to hear that all of her kids were having personal problems. She only expected a few of them, like Luann and Lucy, possibly Lenny, but all 9 of the daughters? It was bad enough that Lincoln was afraid of most of his sisters. Now she had to worry of what kind of expected problems like the rest of her babies were dealing with. She had that guilt feeling that something was off when each of the girls came back with foreign looks. The troubled gazes have left Rita's mind, but she was looking to talk with them of what was causing their pain. The mother bit her knuckles anxiously, just thinking about it. Oh, I hope it isn't anything that can't be fixed. If it weren't, then you wouldn't be here, Miranda half joked. Rita couldn't help but scowl a little. Sorry, it's just a psychology joke. Well, thank you for letting me know. I'll talk with Lynn about it and we'll handle this family in a meeting. Now, Rita shifted on the spot. How much is it going to cost? The doctor shook her head. No charge. I know you and Mr. Lauder stress having your son in the hospital, need to tend to your daughters. Plus, I know it may be add on to whatever your son's in the hospital bill may be. I don't want you both to be stressed out or having to pay for 2 things at once. The Marnich blinked twice. Oh, well, thank you, she smiled. Miranda walked to her desk, where she slipped the business card off the stack, handing it to Rita. Now remember, my office is always open. If you have any questions or concerns, my number is listed on the card. If you need any help, you're always free to call me. My hours are also listed on the card too. Oh, and Rita? Yes? Please let me know when Lincoln is ready to visit. While my talk with him earlier might have done some good for him, I still think it's better for his sake if we meet in person." Rita read over the card for a second. "Oh, trust me, you will. I think he leaves the hospital in another week."